everybody. It's great to be here. So as Leon was saying, I'm going to talk about progress towards supervised injecting facilities in Ireland. Obviously the caveat is that I'm going to be talking about it from Analyfi's point of view, so where I work, and I was very closely involved also in the legislative work and the legal work around it, so I'll talk about that as well with my barrister hat on. But needless to say, setting up something like a supervised injecting facility isn't something that kind of one group of people or anything like that can do by themselves. It requires coordination and cooperation across a whole range and groups of people. So I'll be talking about it from our side of things. So what I'll talk about briefly, first of all, I'm conscious that I'm not in Ireland and people may not know anything about the Analyfi, so who we are and what we do. I'll give a brief kind of introduction into that. I'll talk very briefly about public injecting in Dublin, literally just a couple of slides, because I know Sackett and Mark are going to talk about the situation in Glasgow later on, and it suffices to say that the issues that we see in Dublin are similar to the ones that are set out in the Health Needs Report. And then I'll talk about developing supervised injecting facilities as a policy response in Ireland. So where are we now? So the story so far, how did we kind of get to where we are and where we are now? And then the next steps. So obviously we don't have a service yet, so where do we go from here? So briefly about the Analyfi, we were founded in 1982, so been around a long time. We describe ourselves as a low threshold harm reduction service, or a service operating from a low threshold harm reduction ethos. Our primary work is in direct services, so we have drop-ins, we provide key working, case management, we have nursing service, we have an under 18 service, so and we do those in Dublin, the Midlands and the Midwest. Then nationally we have the online and digital services team, so we do a lot kind of in the online environment, including managing the drugs.ie website, which some of you may have come across if you were doing any research online, and I'm deputising for our director Tony Duffin today. So Tony is modest and would never big himself up, but I will by saying that in 2006 when Tony joined us, we had 9 staff and we had roughly 800,000 euros in revenue, and now we have 35 staff and over 2 million in revenue against the backdrop of the worst economic recession Ireland has ever seen, and we are pretty much 100% state funded. So there's weaknesses obviously in 100% state funding, but I'll tip my cap to Tony for having done a great job at getting the money in, and at the end of the day that is critically important in service delivery. Who we work with, this is obviously a great generalisation, but generally our clients in Dublin, mid-20s to 30s, polydrug use is pretty much the norm. Over half our clients are injectors. There's a lot of kind of dangerous injecting practices, a lot of street drug use, people with complex needs, so comorbid health issues, a lot of family support needed, bereavement, sex work, and so on and so forth. So you'll all know the population that I'm talking about. How we work is interesting. So the top few there are our values that you'll see on our website that came out of our last strategic planning process. So we say that we neither promote nor denounce substance use, but seek to respond to problems associated with it. We believe in rights and responsibilities, we're pragmatic, and we aim to make a positive contribution to society. So there are values, and then in practice, the way we do that is that we try to be non-judgmental and person-centred and solution-focused and innovative. So we try to wear those hats in everything that we do. And I suppose a good example of dealing with the client group that we deal with is our assertive case management team. So Marianne was saying earlier on about how there are low-threshold services in Sydney that then come to the MSIC in a video or on a visit, and they see people there that they don't know, even though these are the services that are in place to engage with people who are on the street. And we saw the same thing in Dublin. There was a report commissioned by the Lord Mayor, which is called, it came out, it was called A Better City for All. And one of the things that it recommended was that there was work done to find out what is the story with drug use and antisocial behaviour in the city centre. And one of the things it showed was that there was kind of maybe 75 to 100 people that were at any one time that were in entrenched street drug use. And when we went out to see what the story was with that, we found that we didn't actually know quite a lot of them. So that there were people there that were hidden even to us. And I think that's important when we're talking about, say, being low threshold, because I often hear people saying that, you know, types of services are low threshold. That's not true. A service is low threshold because of the way it is run. So the lower the barriers you have to accessing a service, the lower the threshold is. And for these people, you know, Analifi, which was our drop-in service, which was fixed site, it operated from 9 to 5. You know, you had to physically get up to go there, to go in, to access it. There might be other people there that you didn't want to see for whatever reason. All of those things are barriers to access. So we weren't working in a way that was sufficiently low threshold to access this group of people. So we've now got an assertive case management team which works very closely with the police, which is another really critical issue for us, because a lot of these people have criminal justice issues and they're carrying warrants. And you know, it was said, look, you know, this can't be done. People won't want to share their information with the police because they'll be afraid that they'll get picked up and they'll just be carted off. And it's not true. So we now work very closely with the police, and it's enabled us to work with people on the street where they are to introduce stability into their lives, and their information is shared across the Analifi, across the Gardaí, the Irish Police, across other state agencies within a kind of case management framework, and it means that we can get better outcomes for the people that we're working with there. And the reason I suppose I give that example is because it's been independently evaluated recently, and it's a good outcomes. So that gives an idea of what the Analifi is and the type of work we do. Public injecting in Dublin. Public injecting in Dublin is very public. So this here, I don't know if anyone's ever been to Dublin, but this is Stephen's Green. So it is our kind of flagship park in the centre of the city. It's beautiful. This is all around here. You have 5-star hotels and Michelin-starred restaurants. So it's not like this is in some sort of backwater deprived area of town. This is Grafton Street running up here, the Gaiety Theatre down here. And then this here is Stephen's Green on last Monday morning. So I don't know if you can see that, but the green bits there are citric packets. There's an awful lot of drug litter. So there are, these kind of public injecting sites all over the city, down pretty much any lane you choose to go. You will find, maybe not as concentrated as this, but you will find detritus from people using drugs publicly. So when we think about, well, what do we mean by that, and let's get a handle on it, and how many people are there, etc., etc. We reckon that about 50% of our client group, or we know that 50% of our client group identify as IDUs. We're currently doing a client survey, so we'll have more updated information on that in the next couple of months. Polydrug use is the norm, and Merchants Quay, who run the largest needle exchange in the city, did a survey in 2014, and one of the things they asked was, where do you mostly inject? So this is where people identified as mostly injecting, and they had a sample in that study, I think, of about 350 odd people, and whatever the proportion was, I can't remember the percentage offhand, but 40 odd people identified as mostly injecting in the public domain. And when you look at the figures of the keys, the individuals accessing the keys needle exchange service as a whole, if you extrapolate that and say, if you say the sample's a good representation of the group as a whole, that would say there's over 400 people mostly injecting in Dublin city centre from that exchange. And we know that although it's the largest one, there are, for example, clients we have that don't access that exchange and that are injecting publicly, and so on and so forth. So when I hear kind of 400 to 500 people in Glasgow, that would kind of fit with, you know, what I feel is the case in Dublin as well. Obviously, it creates a wide range of public and private harms. The things the media like to pick up on are the you know, the discarded needles and close to playgrounds and all of that type of stuff. And that is very shocking, and there is an awful lot of that. There's also other things for us that we can't kind of currently address through our existing services. So if we look here, this is non-sharps waste, but it is clinical waste. This is a citric packet, and there's a cultural thing done where people cook up in citric packets. So you put the drug and the water into the packet, and the packet is foil. But the packet has a plastic on the inside of it. So obviously that's then contaminating whatever it is you're cooking up in it. And then you can see here, this is a syringe wrapper, and you can see there's blood staining on it. So I don't know, maybe somebody didn't manage to get themselves first time round, and are trying to get a syringe open and they're leaving blood on it, which, you know, obviously is not great aseptic technique. But these are the types of things that, you know, we can talk to people about, and we can say things when we're doing exchanges, but unless you're physically there when it's happening, these are not kind of things that you can have really effective interventions around. And then obviously, you know, the injecting situation in Dublin is a problem for everyone, and that's something that we've been very clear to push on at every stage. You know, it's not good for the business community, it's not good for tourism, it's not good for the people who are using in this situation, it's not good for service deliverers, it's not good for the general population, so it's a concern for everyone. Okay, so that's the Analifi and public injecting in Dublin. In terms of developing safer supervised injecting facilities as a response, so in November 2011, we had it set out in our strategic plan. So this is something that we said we were going to do. It was kind of an exercise in how not to set strategic goals, because obviously we didn't know what was actually involved in setting it up, but we said that we would do it by a certain date and all the rest of it. Needless to say, we didn't meet that. At the time, I wasn't actually working in the Analifi, I was working full-time as a barrister. So Tony, sometime later, called me up and said, look, we need a legal opinion on supervised injecting facilities. We need to know what exactly is the situation. Do we need to change the law? If so, how do we change the law? How can we operate? So I did a legal opinion, and the opinion concluded that there'd need to be new legislation, there'd need to be primary legislation in order for a supervised injecting facility to operate under Irish law. And then obviously the next question was, well, how do we get from where we are now, which is knowing that we need legislation, to actually having legislation? And what we did was contacted the voluntary assistance scheme of the bar. And I know I'm somewhat biased in this because I'm a member of the bar, but I would like to give an awful lot of credit to the bar for doing that, because what happened was the bar set up a legislative drafting committee. We had a senior counsel, which is the equivalent of a QC, chair it, who's an expert in health law and planning law. We had an SC, a QC on it, who's an expert in the criminal law around drug offences. And then we had a host of junior counsel, myself included, who had experience of a wide range of other legal issues, including like specialist skills in legislative drafting and medical law and that type of stuff. So these people sat in a room and we met, I suppose, 6 or 7 times, maybe over the course of a year, and we looked at various aspects of the law. So we looked at, for example, policing and what's the situation with policing and SIFs, and we looked at things like planning, because there's no point in, say, having a going all the way and going, right, we're going to open a supervised injecting facility, and then finding that there's some kind of barrier to doing that because of a planning regulation, or because your Medical Practitioners Act has some sort of bar in it. So what we did was we produced an amended version of the legal opinion that was signed up to by the whole group, and we had with that then a kind of draft legislation and an explanatory note to the draft legislation. And then we got a bit of a break, a bit of good luck, which was that Aon O'Riordan at that point became a junior minister with responsibility for drugs. And Aon has a lot of experience of the inner city, outside politics. He's no longer a minister. He was Labour and they were kind of wiped out in the last election. But he is a sitting senator, and he was a principal in an inner city school before he came into the political field. So when he was appointed minister with responsibility for the national drug strategy, he was aware of the issues around drug use. He had seen it firsthand. He knew the kids. He had seen them go through the schooling system and end up running drugs for people, and had seen firsthand the effects. So there was trust there, and Aon picked on 2 things, I suppose, to run with in his during the time he was a minister, and they were decriminalisation. So he opened up a conversation on decriminalisation, which is going in Ireland at the moment, and also on supervised injecting facilities. Now, obviously, decrim is a much bigger piece of work, but with SIFs, Aon drove it from a political point of view. We were behind the scenes working, I suppose, to meet with representatives of other political parties, so meeting with the health spokespeople from other political parties and setting our case out to them and being out in the media and chatting about it and doing all that type of stuff. And it culminated then in December last year. The then Health Minister, Leo Varadkar, brought it to Cabinet and said, look, we've looked at this, we think it's a good idea, we want to legislate for supervised injecting facilities in Ireland, and the Cabinet took a decision that that's what they were going to do. Then in early 2016, the government went and we had a new election, so obviously we were all very fraught that something was going to change, but it didn't. And when the new government came in, they put in legislating for SIFs as something in their programme for government. So that's where we are at the moment with it, and the draft legislation is currently winging its way through, I think, the Office of the Attorney General, and is due to be released or introduced into Parliament for debate later on this year. So that's the point we've got to at this stage. I'm going to talk very briefly now about the types of legal issues that we needed to deal with when we were looking at the bill, and the key kind of things that we're addressing in it. So obviously there's more than one way to skin a cat, with apologies to any animal rights activists in the audience. But we needed a kind of a guiding principle, something that said, what exactly are we doing here? And what we decided we were looking at was, we wanted to develop a framework within which a supervised injecting facility could legally operate, and we only wanted to change what was strictly necessary. So, for example, you know, if you have a supervised injecting facility, it's a given that people who are on the premises, who are clients on the premises, are going to be in possession of controlled substances. So something has to be done about that. But it's not a given that they have to share controlled substances. So I know in Australia it's more of an issue, but you can run a supervised injecting centre without people sharing drugs. So that's the approach we kind of took. And what we ended up with was we needed 2 amendments to the existing legislative framework, and then there was a whole host of other issues that would dictate how a service would operate in a practical way. So the 2 amendments, Section 3 of the Misuse of Drugs Act is simple possession. So it prohibits the possession of a controlled substance. So something needed to be done around that. And then Section 19 contains what's called the permissive offences. I think our misuse of drugs legislation is very closely based on the misuse of drugs legislation here. Certainly, if it's the UK legislation, I think it is. It's similar. So Section 19 provides for the permissive offences. So, for example, if Leon is carrying heroin, he is in possession of heroin. I'm sure he's not, by the way, but he's in possession of heroin. If I'm controlling these premises, then I'm also committing a crime if I know he has it and I don't do anything about it. So clearly, if you're running a supervised injecting facility, you know that people there have drugs and are preparing them and so on and so forth. So something has to be done about that. Then you have the kind of interesting things of the other issues. There's a range in there. Maybe I'll talk briefly about Section 4 of the Non-Fatal Offences Against the Person Act. It's quite an interesting one. So Section 4 is the offence of causing serious harm. And Section 2 of that Act is simple assault. And in Irish law, I'm not sure if it's the same over here or not, but in Irish law, one of the things you need to prove if you're proving an assault is that it was done without consent. So I'll use an example again, Leon, with apologies, but if I slap Leon, it's an assault, but if I get prosecuted and Leon stands up and said, well, actually, I don't mind, and I consented to that happening to me, then the prosecution isn't going to hold. Then Section 3 is assault causing harm. So if I punch Leon and cause him harm, then he can still stand up in court and say, well, I consented to that happening, and it's fine. But Section 4 is an offence called causing serious harm. And with causing serious harm, it's not an assault-based offence, so there's no element of consent. So that means that if I was to inject Leon with something and he was to have a bad reaction to it and suffer serious harm as a result, like falling unconscious and suffering brain damage or something like that, then it wouldn't, even if he survived and everything, it wouldn't do me any good for him to stand up in court and say, I consented to that happening, because you can't consent to serious harm being caused to you. So obviously that then has an effect on how the service operates in reality, because it means that one service user can't be allowed inject another service user, because there is, as Marianne was saying earlier, there's the risk of the service being found guilty of being grossly negligent, but there's also the risk of the service user themselves finding themselves at the end of a criminal act. So the draft bill, what it does is that it allows for the minister to issue licences. It allows for statutory preconditions to the issuing of a licence, so looking at the area, amenity, all that type of stuff. It protects the operators from the actions in negligence, so similar to Good Samaritan legislation. It allows the Minister to make regulations for the running of the service centre, and it amends Section 3 and 19. So the current state of play, this is where we are. As I said, it's in the current programme for government with the Office of the AG, and we expect introduction into Parliament in late 2016, and if it's passed, then the focus turns to the next steps. So what are those next steps? And I have a sign here that says reality check ahead, because the reality is, you know, giving legal opinions on things and saying this is what we need to do in relation to the law, and looking at the the legal side of things, and even going through the legislative process, all of that is fairly ethereal and uncontentious. But then when you get down to the brass tacks of it, that's where things get important, where the rubber hits the road. So the first thing from our point of view, from Anna Liffey's point of view, is to make sure that the legislation is fit for purpose. So Marianne talked about earlier on things like a statutory bar to pregnant women or under 18s or having more than one licence. We want to avoid those things. We want to make sure that the legislation is flexible, and obviously that the services are appropriately regulated, but having a statutory bar to say pregnant women accessing a service isn't helpful, and it shouldn't happen. So that'll be the first port of call for us, and then you're going to be moving to the operational. So who's going to operate these services? Where will they be located? Where will they be funded? And how will they be evaluated? And that is critical. So they're all the next steps. And then for us, obviously, engaging with stakeholders. And this is something that we've learned from engaging with stakeholders so far, because we've been quite out and about in the public domain about it. The first thing is to know what you're talking about. So we did a huge amount of work in preparing and putting together a communication strategy, and doing all those things, and knowing the arguments for and against, and so on and so forth. And there's a debate going on at the moment in Ireland about decriminalisation, and I see people talking about it all the time on every side of the fence, and a lot of it, even stuff that's out there in the media and that is just not right. So it's important to make sure that you're getting the right message out there. Speak to the self-interest of your stakeholders. This is a critical point. Tony was lucky enough to go over and spend time with Marianne and her team in Sydney, and he came back and said, I learned a really valuable lesson. I was talking to somebody over there from the business community, and I was talking to him about the centre, and I was saying to him, we're finding it difficult getting traction at home. We're talking about, I said, well, what are you saying? He said, well, I'm talking about the health needs and hepatitis and public injecting and all this type of stuff. He's like, businesses don't care about that, right? It's like footfall and tourism and these type of things. So make sure you're speaking to the self-interest of your stakeholders, because when we came back and we were able to explain to people, look, this isn't good for anybody, no matter what way you run it, we were able to get much. You were able to get much better traction. Find common ground with your detractors. This has been critical as well, because all our detractors, the people who come out of the woodwork, they might say, look, we're against it, what you're trying to do, but at the same time, they don't want people injecting down lanes, and they don't want stuff being unsafely disposed around the place. So there's always common ground. Engage with the media, and this was something certainly that was very alien to us as an NGO, working with drug users. It was not something that we did, but we kind of learned to do it, and Tony in particular became a relentless promoter of this. And you can Google Tony Duffin, Anna Liffey and news, and you can see the list of things, Tony being in the media around it. And finally, you need the support of many, many others. This isn't the type of thing that can be parachuted in. You need to, I suppose, realise, as I get the sense that Glasgow has come to this kind of conclusion, that what's happening, the way things are going, isn't working, and we need change, and we need to look at innovative solutions from other jurisdictions that the evidence supports, and we all need to get around that. The whole range of statutory services and the NGOs and the broader business and residential communities. So it takes everybody working together. So that's where we are, and thanks very much.